Would you pray with me, please? Most holy God, we ask that you open the eyes of our hearts this night, so that we may see you. We may see you in the familiar, we may see you in the unexpected. We may see you and to know you better. We ask this in your holy name. Amen. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge that it's Mother's Day today. And in our time of prayer, I'd like to offer a special prayer for all of us who identify as mothers, or grandmothers, as it may be. Last week, we looked at the story of Esther. And Esther is an amazing story in that it's 2,500 years old. And of course, we did that last week in the form of a play. And that was lots of fun. This week, I'd like to look at a story that's a little bit more recent, because I wrote it this week. And the difference with this story is not a play, this story is a musical, and you're going to add all the music to it. Now, invariably, that's difficult to do because we don't have a license to use music online. However, a number of years ago I joined a wonderful site called Melody Lane. And Melody Lane is a treasure trove of songs from the mid-1800s all the way through to the early 1920s. And some of which you will know, believe it or not. And the interesting thing is that, of course, they're now all out of copyright, so they're all public domain songs, which means that we can use them. And I have changed one or two of the words, but actually, quite often, the words that you think I have changed, I haven't, which is really interesting. So today's story is about a young man called Louis, who grew up in a place called Neoga, Illinois. Now, Neoga, Illinois is a small town. And when I say small town, the nearest city is a place called Effingham, Illinois, which you'll find on the map. That's the big city, with a population of around 12,500, which means it would take 32 Effinghams to make a Brighton. That's the size of the nearest big city. Then you've got the metropolis, which is St. Louis, which actually isn't in Illinois, it's in Missouri, but because it's just over the state line, it is the nearest big city. But at the beginning of our story, Louis has never been to the big city. He's been to Effingham a few times to buy school uniforms, to go to the cinema there, and a show now and again. The town hall doubles as a cinema and doubles as a place where they show musicals. So he'd gotten to know Effingham quite well. The thing about Louis is that growing up, of course, Louis knew that he was different. However, until he hit puberty, he really didn't know what that difference was. And of course, when he hit puberty, then he realized that he wasn't interested in the girls, like the other boys were, but actually he was interested in the boys. He also was wise enough to know that it was dangerous to talk about this. He certainly couldn't talk about it with his father or his mother, or any of his 6 siblings. He also couldn't talk about it with anyone at school. The 2nd grade teacher doubled as the school nurse and the school counsellor. He wasn't going to go and talk to her. He also wasn't going to go and talk to the pastor of the church, God forbid, or anyone else in the church about this, because he could imagine what would happen if he did. So he kept his head low. He got on with his life the best he could. At 18, he left school, and he went to work for the local 7-Eleven in town. And by the time he was 19, he was the assistant manager of the 7-Eleven. And that's when another character of our story comes into play. And this is a young man whose name is Edsel. And Edsel moves into Neoga, rents a trailer there, and gets a job at the 7-Eleven where Louis is working. And almost straight away, they become really good friends. And most evenings you could find Louis over at Edsel's place, and they'd be playing video games, they'd be chatting, they'd be drinking beer, and they just really hit it off and were good friends. One night they were playing a video game. Edsel had dropped out of the game and actually had fallen asleep on the couch. It was getting late, so it was getting chilly. So rather than wake up Edsel, Louis put the game on hold and went into the bedroom to see if he could find a sweater to wear. Went to the wardrobe, opened the wardrobe door, and on the right-hand side were all the usual things that he expected in a wardrobe: some shirts, a suit, jeans. But on the left-hand side was this collection of dresses. And these are the kind of dresses that you would see at the Oscars. I mean, full-length, beautiful gowns. One that's right at the front was this beautiful petrol blue gown with sequins all over it. And not knowing what to make of it, Louis just closed the door, went back to his game, and said nothing. But over the next 2 weeks, he couldn't help wondering about the dresses. Maybe they'd been left by a wealthy relative who'd passed away and Edsel couldn't bear to be parted from them. Or maybe they were an investment. Maybe they were worth something and Edsel was selling them. Maybe Edsel had stolen them from some rich household and was waiting a while before he fenced them off. Eventually, Louis got up the courage to say, okay, one night, a couple of weeks ago, I went into your bedroom when you were asleep to look for a sweater, forgive me. I saw the gowns in the wardrobe. There was silence for a moment, and Edsel said, have you ever had a dream, Louis? And Louis said, no. And Edsel said, but everyone's had a dream, Louis. And Edsel said, well, no, not me. Not anymore. He said, I used to have dreams. And what I found was all the dreams that I dreamt were just like, they were like little bubbles, because you set them free and then rather than coming true, they just burst. And nothing ever came true, so I stopped dreaming. And then he started singing. And it's on your sheet. Chris is going to lead us.
I'm dreaming dreams, I'm scheming schemes, I'm building castles high. They're born and new, their days are few, just like a sweet butterfly. And as the daylight is dawning, they come again in the morning. I'm the weather blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air. They fly so high, nearly reach the sky. Then like my dreams they fade and die. Fortune's always hiding. I've looked everywhere. I'm forever blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air. And shadows creep when I'm asleep. To lands of hope I stray. Then at daybreak, when I awake, my bluebird flutters away. Happiness, you seem so near me. Happiness, come forth and cheer me. I'm forever blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air. They fly so high, nearly reach the sky. Then like my dreams they fade and die. Fortune's always hiding. I've looked everywhere. I'm forever blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air.
Oops, stop. So, at that point, Edsel said, actually, I believe that if you dream hard enough and long enough, then your dreams come true. And I have a dream. I'm not going to be here in the back sticks of Neova for the rest of my life. I have a dream of being a drag queen. And I have already started on my routines, on my makeup, I'm buying the wigs, and when I've got everything ready, then I'm going to go to the big city. And I mean the big city. I'm going to go to St. Louis. And I am going to go there and I am going to hit the scene as Miss Illinois. At which point, Louis said, you know, people are going to think odd things about you if they hear about this. At which point Edsel said, what? That I'm gay? Well, I am. What about it? At which point Louis said, well, actually, I am too. And that was the first night that Louis spent with Edsel. And 2 weeks later, they got an apartment. Edsel moved out of the trailer. Louis moved out of his home and they moved into an apartment together. Nobody thought anything of it. It was usual for lads to get an apartment of their own for a while before they kind of spread their wings and settled down. So people just thought they were friends, getting together, learning what it was to keep house and have responsibilities. Nobody thought anything of it. Louis continued to go to Sunday lunch at home, continued to go to the church he'd always gone to, continued to meet occasionally with the friends, and still he spent his life with Edsel. And this worked well for about 2 years. And then Edsel sat down with Louis one night and said, you know what? I've got to the point now where everything's set. I have a dozen routines that I've got off pat. I've got the songs, I've got the music, I've got the hair, I've got the dresses, I've got the shoes, I've got everything now. I'm ready to go to St. Louis. Come with me. Come with me. And they had this huge row, and Louis said, no, I couldn't possibly leave here. This is my hometown. What would I do there? How could I manage there? The next morning, they didn't say a word to each other. During the day, Louis thought about it and thought, you know, when I get in tonight, I'll make a nice meal for Edsel. We'll sit and talk about it. He'll think this through and he'll change his mind. But when he got home, he had a bit of a shock. The janitor said to him, whose name was John, by the way, John the janitor. John said, why don't you just go to St. Louis? He loves you. He wants you there with him. Why don't you just go? At which point Louis said, I can't. I mean, it's fine for Edsel. He's tall, he's slim, he's handsome. He'll do well in St. Louis. But what about me? I'm short, I'm dumpy, I'm hairy. You know, who's going to want me? At which point the janitor said, the world is full of gay men that look just like you. In fact, look at me. At which point Louis said, you're not gay, are you? And the janitor said, of course I am. There's lots of us. We're just hiding. We're just behind the scenes. You have to look for us. And Louis said, well, where would I look? And he said, well, have you been down to the cruising ground of I-27? And he says, no. He said, well, you know where the monument is, where the park is. You park at the monument, and you go for a walk straight down into the woods, and you'll meet lots of men just wandering around late at night. Go on a Saturday night, go down about midnight, and you'll meet lots of men. And he said, do you really think so? And John said, yes, of course. There's lots of people just like you, down in the woods. And so they sang.
If you go down to the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down to the woods today, you better go in disguise. For every bear that ever there was gathered there for certain, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic. Every teddy bear who's been good is sure of a treat today. There's lots of marvelous things to eat and wonderful games to play. Beneath the trees where nobody sees, they'll hide and seek as long as they please, 'cause that's the way the teddy bears have their picnic.
to get up the courage to do what John had suggested, but eventually one evening he went down to the woods and he noticed that there were lots of men down there, and there was a pattern to their behaviour, that what would happen is they'd walk along, and if somebody liked the look of them, then they'd follow them a while. So the person, if they liked the look of them, would stop, and then they'd connect and they'd talk for a while, and then they'd disappear altogether. So as he's walking along, very nervous, very excited, scared, but amazed at this new world that he's found, this guy starts following him along. So he turns around and stops. The guy catches him up and they start to talk. And then they go back to Louis' car. They open the back seat, the back door, and they get into the back seat together. And they're just starting to get to know each other when suddenly there's a bright light, the back door opens, and there's a voice says, "Get out, we're arresting you for indecent behaviour in a public place." And he's dragged out of the car. He's blinded by the light. His hands are cuffed behind his back. The next thing in the daze, he finds himself in the back of a police car. Then he finds himself at the police station with some people that are just looking at him very strangely. He realises he's not in a safe place and he doesn't know what to do. So in desperation, he calls his father, who comes down to the police station to pick Louis up. Louis thinks that what will happen is that when his father gets down there, there'll be a huge row. But actually it was worse than that. When they got down there, his father didn't even look at Louis. In fact, they drove back to Louis' flat. Not a word was spoken, and his father didn't even look at him. When Louis got out of the car, he turned round to his father and said, "Look, I'm sorry." And his father didn't even look at him. He just reached across the door, pulled the door closed, and drove away. Louis got inside, and he just lost it. He started to cry and cry and cry, and he woke John up, who lived below. And John came up and said, "What's the matter?" And Louis explained what had happened, that he'd gone where John had suggested, that this had happened, he'd been arrested. And John said, "Well, there's only one thing for it. You have to do what Edsel's done. You have to follow Edsel down to St. Louis and see if you can make a life for yourself there. Because here, it's not going to be safe for you any longer. Here, it's not going to be home for you any longer. You need to find somewhere where you're going to be safe." Louis looks at Edsel and says, "But I can't. I can't go down there and just look at me. Nobody's going to want me. I'm not going to do for work. How will I find a job? I have absolutely no idea." And John said, "Look, it's a big city. There are people like you making it down there every single day. There are lots of people that are doing this, that are moving to the big city for lots of different reasons. You won't be alone very long. And I know that Edsel's there waiting for you, and even if he wasn't, it would be the place to go and you would meet people straight away." At which point Louis said, "No, I don't think so. I really don't think that people can do it. It's not that easy." And John said, "Of course it is. Everybody's doing it."
Honey, honey, can't you hear? Funny, funny music here. Ain't the funny strain going to a rain like a bottle of wine? Fine, hum, 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 take a chance. One little dance. Can't you see
decides that what he'll do is he'll go to the big city. And he drives his beat-up Chevy down to Effingham. He parks in the back street. He goes to the station. He buys a one-way ticket into St. Louis. And the first thing he does when he gets there is he leaves the station and he goes into a local gay bar. And he sits for a while. He orders a drink. He gets the local paper. He opens it up. And the first page, as he opens it, he sees a picture of Edsel, looking amazing in the blue gown that he'd seen in the wardrobe, with hair up here, with makeup on, looking absolutely fabulous. And it said, Miss Illinois performing tonight. So he thought, right, I'll go there and I'll see if we can do something, see how Edsel receives me. And he goes to the club, and it's late, it's midnight when Edsel comes on, and they bring on Miss Illinois, and she walks on in all glamour, and everybody cheers and everybody claps, and Louis feels about this big, and he thinks, how can I compete with all of this? All of these people that just love Edsel. And then Edsel sings, and Louis didn't realize that Edsel could sing, and this beautiful voice comes out that enraptures everybody. And at that point, Louis realizes that Edsel really is the most extraordinary performer, and that he's going to go far. So after the show, Louis goes backstage and knocks on the door. And Edsel says, come in. Louis walks in, and Edsel says, Louis, what are you doing here? And Edsel, Louis, what are you doing here? And Louis said, well, I came for you. I hope that perhaps you might still want to be with me. At which point Edsel said, want to be with you, and sang to him.
I'm dreaming, dear, of you, day by day, dreaming when the skies are blue, when the silvery moonlight gleams, still I wander on in dreams, in a land of love it seems, just with you. Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too. Keep the love light glowing in your eyes so true. Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. Longing for you all the while, more and more. Longing for the sunny smile I adore. Birds are singing far and near, roses blooming everywhere. You alone my heart can cheer, you, just you. Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. Let me hear you whisper that you love me too. Keep the love light glowing in your eyes so true. Let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you.
Of course, Louis and Edsel lived happily ever after. Many years later, looking back, Edsel was a huge star. Miss Illinois owned her own club with her own artistes. And Louis owned a chain of 7-Elevens all around Missouri. Now you may wonder, what has this story got to do with God? Where is God in this story? Well, actually, the story that we shared last week, the story of Esther, is one of the most famous books of the Bible because it is the only book in the Bible. Do you know what? It's the only book in the Bible that never mentions God. Not once. In the book of Esther, God is not mentioned ever. The reason it found its way into the canon of Scripture is because when you read the story, you can feel God's presence in it and you can see God in it. Look for God in our own stories. Find God in our own stories. Because God's just as present there, even if God isn't named. Amen.